Tonight we'll be talking about all week, which I'd like to review just a little bit, and then we're going to do something. I don't know what we're going to do tomorrow night, but we'll do something tomorrow night, and now for something completely different. I did want to just speak a few minutes about, and nothing reflecting on those who could not make it through the last couple of days, but that seems to be a trend in our walk, is that things start whittling down. And so I'd rather focus on the fact that you guys are the hardcore people. Okay? And that's your area of the last couple of days, and you're still hanging in there. And I don't know why we're not rejoicing just as much the last 2 days as we did the first 2 days. That's why I enjoyed the praise and worship tonight. And that I didn't have to be doing anything. I could be out enjoying and worshiping, and even dancing a couple of times, and I could tell. Some of you know that we're coming into the Sukkot Torah, and that very special time of the year when we make that transition from finishing the Torah, and as we enter into the new season of studying the Torah. Now, I know some people may think, well, isn't that like a Jewish tradition? And there are some interesting traditions. The first thing I'd like to say is, not all traditions are bad. That's number one. And sometimes tradition helps us to understand the actual commandment itself. Even though that's not the actual commandment itself, and some people replace the commandment with the tradition, and then judge people because they're not doing the tradition, as if they're not keeping the commandment. Did that make sense? Yeah. Someone explain it to me. But traditions are good. Many traditions are good. One of the great traditions on this particular time of year that we're going to be doing tomorrow, we're entering into tonight and into tomorrow, is when they would finish the Torah portion, and they would have a priest on one end of the temple, and another priest at the other end of the temple, and the one at the end of this end of the temple would. You remember when there's a passage in John which says the scriptures shall not be broken? Some people believe that is referring to this tradition, this rabbinic tradition, or this priestly tradition, where the last priest would end the book of Deuteronomy. He'd say, Rei Chor Israel, and he'd hold that note. And then as he's sustaining that note, then the priest on the other end would go, Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, and he would go into and they would be unbroken. As they entered into the new Torah season. Now, when it comes to tradition, once again, that's fine. But I'm going to suggest to you that the whole concept of the Torah readings is based upon the last chapter of Malachi. The last 3 verses of Malachi tells us prophetically that do not remember. Excuse me, I'll put it the other way. Remember the Torah of Moses. And then it says, behold, I send you Elijah the messenger. Do you remember that? Yeah. So it says 2 things prophetically. Remember, and I believe the Father put it right there in Malachi, because he's, smarter than we are. And he knew that in the English Bibles, this would be the last thing we would read before we would read the Gospel of Matthew and read all the genealogy and everything. And I think he also knew that religious systems would come along and make all the things that they had just said basically irrelevant. Done away with, that whole story. I think he knew that. And so he purposely, even though he knew that the Hebrew Bibles end in 2 Chronicles, I think he purposely knew that the most popularly distributed and read Bible in the world, the King James Version, would end with Malachi. And so he ended it with these words, remember the Torah of Moses, and I will send you Elijah the messenger. Remember, the ministry of Elijah the messenger was to restore all things. So he says, remember the Torah of Moses. Now he says, I'm going to send you Elijah the messenger. Why? Because I know you're not going to remember the Torah. And so I'm going to send you this character called Elijah, and he's going to restore all things. And it's not a coincidence that we're singing the days of Elijah more than any other song in the last 25 years, especially in the Hebrew Walk, because that was all about restoration. And remember the second line, as I said the other night. These are the days of Moses. This is so cool to me. Remember the days of Moses. Righteousness being restored. Whoops. I thought that had anything to do with Moses. So he associates righteousness with the days of Moses. And it says the purpose of Elijah the messenger was to restore things back to the way they were, so the hearts of the fathers would be turned to the children, and the hearts of the children would be turned back to the fathers. Now, when I was a young pastor and I would read that passage out, I thought that that's talking about my dad. You know, in the latter days, my dad's going to be restored back to me, and I'll be restored back to my dad. And I kept thinking, I have a pretty good relationship with my father. And I know a lot of people that have pretty, but I didn't realize, no, it's talking about the same guys, the same fathers in the middle. It's the same fathers in the beginning. This is the same fathers in the end. That is Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so I realized that it's saying he's going to turn the hearts of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob back to the children, and the hearts of the children back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I'm going to suggest to you that many of us in here were raised in religious systems, traditionally Christian, in which we were in Sunday school and we learned things about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We learned all the stories. We read the stories in Sunday school. We memorized little passages and little verses, and we sung little songs in order to memorize those passages. And we all learned about, the giraffes floating in the boat in Noah's day and all those kind of things. But I'm going to suggest that there was a time that was prophesied when we would learn the hearts of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Remember what this whole purpose is this whole week? Is the heart of the matter. Getting back to the heart of things. I believe that we have drifted away from the heart. And some of us are going to end up sending our children right into the holy place to do all that stuff. See, in Hebrew, we don't say stuff, we say stuff. Come on, that's fun, I don't care. But to learn all this stuff when we've circumvented the heart. And so the whole idea is to learn the hearts of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And now we're learning those kind of things. And so we're going to be starting that tomorrow as we go back and start the tour portions over. And so I'm glad we are at least still as excited about this feast this last 2 nights as we were the first 2 nights. Okay? Let's move on. I've got a Puerto Rico here because I should do it up there. Because I don't remember where we were at. But I bet you when we get there, some of you will recognize it. We're talking about the first work. And as soon as I get there, I'm going to review here very quickly. Father always does the first work. I know we went through this. It's been a couple of days and we all slept. Remember we did the good, very good thing? The difference between good and very good is the difference between something completed for its purpose, but something that also gives life. That's the difference. The law is good, the grace is good, but they're not very good until they work together. Can I at least ask you all, if we can get past that, can we all see that? Yes. That I'm going to raise as much as I can the rest of the evening to the fact that the Father always does the first work. But if it stays right there, then it can't give us life, much less abundant life. It's designed to work together. And see, that's the principal problem with traditional Western religious systems, as they have been taught that one has been done away with. And they only see that in theology. What I mean by that is we have a tendency just to argue biblical passages back and forth. Yeah, it's almost. I'm sorry, that caught my attention for some reason. Now I forgot what I was saying. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. We have a tendency to argue passages back and forth. Now, I know we're supposed to compare Scripture with Scripture, but I'm going to suggest that we've been doing this for 2,000 years. Whenever a person believes, they bring up the 50 passages they believe supports their position, and these guys bring up the 50 passages they believe supports their position. We never get anywhere. Because nobody, when they do a treatise on something, I don't care what the subject is, ever bothers to quote the passages that they disagree or contradict the position. They only quote the ones that agree with their position. And we never get anywhere. That's why I'm telling you that theology and understandings and interpretations can change over time. That's the reason why the Father decided to take His precious word and turn it over to the birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees. Because birds are still producing, whether the evolutionists agree with it or not, birds are still producing birds, bees are still producing bees, and all these things in the natural creation work together in order to produce life. One of the main reasons why you have life in this general area with respect to the bees and all the other things is because of the birds. You have birds that are indigenous to this area right here. That's where they belong. That's where they're designed to be. And those birds, the Father has embedded in those birds just the right song that the birds sing in the morning. Just the right frequency with those birds in the morning. And those frequencies, those resonating frequencies working together causes the flowers to open. And when the flowers open, the bees can come in and pollinate the flowers. And you know all about bees because we got bees up there on the screen in the GIT program. And so all these things work together. If the birds stop singing their songs, and the flowers stop opening, and the bees stop pollinating the flowers, pretty soon we're out of here. And everything is designed to work together. All I'm saying is the Scripture is exactly the same way. It's all designed to work together. Everything depends on everything else. And I've been using the word interdependency, but it's symbiotic. It's another word. They can use everything's designed to work together, but there's an order to everything. And if I got that through, I'm satisfied I've accomplished something in the last week. Both of them are called good, but they're designed to work together. We did all the science stuff, I believe. Okay, we did this. I remember we got to here. We got here. Father always does the work, first work. Okay, Noah found a grace in the eyes of Elohim, and then he built an ark. We talked about Abel first bringing an offering of blood, and then the Father accepted his mincha. Do you remember that? The other night, that both Abel, for those of you who weren't here, we went through it very meticulously, I hope, that both Abel and Cain brought the exact same offering from the exact same cursed ground. If you read it very carefully, you don't even need to read it in Hebrew. Just read it in English. Because sometimes we just skip over things and assume that everybody told us that's what it means. So that's what it means. They both brought a cursed offering. But the Lord accepted Abel's because he first brought the blood. So it wasn't the blood or the offering. It wasn't choose one or the other. It was the both work together, right? And that's how we had respect to his offering. And one came before the other. This pattern never changes. I know I've been beating that dead horse for a couple. But we have example after example. First Noah finds grace in the eyes of Elohim and then tells him to build an ark. Here's what I'm suggesting to you. Without God's grace, he would have never been able to build the ark. He would never have the authority or the power or the strength to be able to build the ark. The Father knew he needed his grace in him in order to be able to succeed in anything he sets his hand to do. We need to teach that to the next generation. Because they're living with this whole internet thing, and we got all kinds of things standing against them. I do believe this next generation is different from the ones that you and I grew up in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. I think it's much different. They have to face something we didn't have to face. And that's this flood of information. And that flood of information, just the means by which that information has to get from point A to point B is destructive enough. Not to mention the information once they receive it. And so we're dealing with all these, so we really need to focus on our young people. I think this is where we are. Abraham believed Elohim, and then he kept his commandments. First he believed, Genesis chapter 15, then Genesis chapter 26, then he kept his commandments. And what was the result of it? His seed would bless all the nations of the earth and all the families of the earth because he first believed. And then he kept the ways of his God. And that seed, the word in Elohim, is going to be the pattern from every believer. Every believer is after the seed of Abraham. Once again, not after the seed of Moses, not after the seed of Isaiah, not after the seed of the Pope, but it's after the seed of Abraham because he's the model of how this whole thing works. First faith, then the commandments. Moses and the Israelites were redeemed by the blood, as I said, and then they were taken to Mount Sinai. The purpose of Mount Sinai was to give them the means by which to survive the wilderness. But unless they had the blood of the Lamb and the grace of God and receiving of the word in them, they would have never had the ability to be able to survive the wilderness. So the Father first knew that blood had to be applied. Remember, blood is relationship.